Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Captain Hunter's podcast. This is a bonus episode, and I really appreciate you coming along. The reason for this bonus episode is because I, along with so many other people, were very, enamored by this conversation that has been going on between Snoop Dogg, Gayleking, the Gayleking interview with Lisa Leslie. Everyone chimed in on it, and I wanted to kind of chime in on it as well, but I thought maybe I shouldn't or maybe I won't. But then I watched this brother, Philippe Shock Matthews. He has his YouTube channel. I've been following his YouTube channel for quite some time now, and I really liked the way he did a monologue breaking down what was going on in the mind of Gayleking. Now, obviously, he did not interview Gayleking. He is just going off of his years of study and research and trying to understand what caused Gayleking to ask Lisa Leslie these very viral questions. I'm sure that everyone out there is very much familiar with that particular interview. So Philippe Shock Matthews does this monologue and does a great job, in my estimation, of breaking down what happened in the mind of Gayleking. And what I liked especially about his analysis is that he came and approached it from a very empathetic and sympathetic manner. He did not attempt to bash Gayleking or Oprah Winfrey. He attempted to give an understanding of the trauma that is behind her framing of the questions, their willingness to do these interviews, and for so many people, particularly in the Black community, are so upset with Gayleking and with Oprah Winfrey in particular because they continue to, it seems, go after Black men who are accused of rape or accused of sexual misdeeds and misconduct. Now, we understand that there's been numerous people. Gayleking herself worked with one Charlie Rose. Did she or Oprah Winfrey ever go after or do a documentary about Charlie Rose or Matt Lauer or Harvey Weinstein, who there's numerous pictures floating around the internet with Oprah and Harvey Weinstein? No, they didn't. What they did was they went after Robert Kelly, R. Kelly. I did a whole week-long documentary and other documentaries about Michael Jackson, Russell Simmons. And so here's just another case of them going after Kobe Bryant. The man is barely cold, not even in the ground yet as we release this. And it's just a shame and a tragedy that we continue to do this. So there's been a schism that has arisen over this matter, and so many people are looking at it from that perspective. So I don't want to talk too much more about this, but I do want to read you Philippe Matthews' bio, and then we'll get right into it. Reverend Philippe Shock Matthews is a minister of metaphysical science and philosophy and the founding minister of the First Frequency of Oneness, Science, Manifestation, and Prosperity. You can go over to his website, firstfrequency.com. That's the number 1, stfrequency.com. The word shock stands for seeking higher omnipotent consciousness or cosmic knowledge. He is affectionately named by the community as the metaphysical Morpheus because he has a unique ability of shocking our people out of their false racial identities and back into the mind of the original first frequency of oneness. Reverend Shock is a social entrepreneur and member of the International Metaphysical Ministry and host of the Philippe Matthews Show, dedicated to featuring content on the subject of disruptive economics, digital wealth creation, critical race theory, social justice, anti-racism, historical intergenerational trauma, African American mental illness, genetic memory, otherwise known as epigenetics, axiology, comedic science, metaphysics, racial socialization, and healing racialized poverty. The Philippe Matthews Show has over 4.7 million YouTube views and 35 or almost 36, actually I think it's like 37,000 subscribers. He's the founder of the Shock Metaphysics Virtual Comedic Wisdom School. That's at shockmetaphysics.com, and has authored more than 17 Amazon books and 7 bestsellers. He's been hailed as the Marcus Garvey of our time by Hidden Colors 1 through 5 star Kaba Hiawatha Kameni, and co-author of Chicken Soup for the Soul. Mark Victor Hansen calls Philippe the Oprah of the internet. He's got a number of websites, thepmshow.tv, shockmetaphysics.com. You can follow him on Twitter. He's on Facebook's The PM Show, YouTube, Philippe Matthews, Blog Talk Radio, Instagram, Reverend Shock. So just make sure you check this brother out, give him some love. go over to Philippe Shock Matthews on YouTube. Search for The Making of Gayle King and Oprah, The Making of Gayle King and Oprah. It's a really, really powerful video concerning all this type of stuff. And as I posted this, as I'm doing this, I just learned that after the viral and vitriolic response by Snoop Dogg, he has since apologized to Gayle. I mean, he should not have called her out of her name. Let's just be honest about that. But so he has apologized to Gayle. Nevertheless, we want to try to understand what and how Miss King and Oprah Winfrey are processing the world in which they live. And so I think he did a really great job with that. So enough of me going on. This is a bonus episode. I re-emailed this brother. He emailed me back. And within about an hour or two, we got up on the phone. And this is the result of this brother's knowledge all off the top of his head. And just before we get into it, just bear with us. We're going to spend the first 45 minutes or so talking about police trauma and things like that. If you want to just get to the Gayle part of it, skip ahead about 45 minutes. Nevertheless, I think that his breakdown of the police analysis is somewhat correct. He specializes in trauma, so he's attempting to break down and give us an understanding of the trauma that happened between Oprah Winfrey and the trauma that many police officers face from the childhood bringing up until their time in law enforcement and what happens on their time in law enforcement, whether you're a black police officer or a white police officer. He deals with trauma. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, here is the interview that we just kind of did off the top of our head.
Hey, all right, Captain.
All right, man. I really appreciate it, man. You were dropping such bombs on me, man. So I just need to get this recorded, brother. I really appreciate it. Even if we got to do it again another time, but what you're saying is so deep, man. So I really wanted to, yeah. So just continue. You're talking about the police officers and the level of trauma, the four stages of response.
Yeah. Okay. So going back, so police officers are bombarded with trauma more than any other human being or any other industry in the world. Military people, for the most part, they get an opportunity after engaging in theater to come home, to have some level of debrief. And this is why when they go over there, they're traumatized. When they come home, this is why they call it post-traumatic stress disorder, because it's post. Police officers, there's no post. There's no rest period, because you have to get up the next day and do this and go back into combat again. And when you're a rookie, you have to do things and see things that the human body, the human mind, the human eyes and brains are not supposed to sense and see. And so that trauma then gets embedded and locked inside of you. And then you just have to chalk it up and go to work the next day. Now, there are four trauma responses. Most people know of three. They know about fight, flight, freeze. But the fourth trauma response is to annihilate or destroy. So a police officer, most people, they might fight physically. Police officers don't have that option necessarily, because it could be a threat to their life, or they could be injured, which will, of course, affect their family and their livelihood. They damn sure can't freeze, because that could kill you. So you can't flee, you can't fight. And so what happens is that you start to build a trauma response called annihilate. This is why you see police officers pumping 20, 30, 40, 50 bullets in someone, because it's a trauma response. What happened to Philando Castile, as unfortunate as it was a trauma response. It wasn't necessarily a racial response. It was a trauma response. And trauma is reflexive. It's not something that you control. When you go to the doctor as a kid, you remember when the doctor hit you in the knee with the rubber hammer and you kick the shit out of the doctor? Well, that's what trauma is. You can't control that. It's a reflexive thing. And so if you don't know that you are being bombarded every day with trauma, that's your job is really, you are a trauma response unit. You're not a police response unit. You are a trauma response unit, and you don't get the opportunity to debrief. So what you'll end up doing is going with your boys in blue, going drinking. This is why the domestic violence level in policing is so high. The suicide rates are so high. It's because that trauma gets to a point where it annihilates the host, which is the individual, because you just don't know how to deal with what you have seen, what you have done. There are, so with a black police officer, there's a difference between black and white policing when you're dealing with, but all police officers, black, white, Asian, PLCs, people of color, whatever it is, all deal with that trauma on a daily basis. African-American police officers also have to deal then with racialized battle fatigue, institutionalized racism within the force. Women have to deal with that plus sexism. And so there's a trauma level and a buildup that is deadly. And so you either kill yourself slowly over time through drinking and maladaptive behaviors and various different types of addictions, or instantly in terms of a situation of suicide, or you're going to be in a situation where you're going to overreact, overrespond. That annihilation trauma response is going to happen, and somebody gets killed. And you see this happening all the time. Now, sometimes that is a racially sensitive issue. But it's always a trauma issue. It's always a trauma issue. What happened to Ed Gardner, what happened to Philando Castile, and I know some of the people out there listening might say, this is hard to receive, but you have to understand what trauma does to, and I specialize in my ministry dealing with Black trauma, okay? And so Black trauma is something that is embedded in us. Now, I have this concept called the trauma triangle. But before I get into the trauma triangle, and remind me if I get off on a tangent to remind me to bring back to that, to come back to that.
Okay.
Police officers, for the most part, are fleeing trauma. That's why you become a police officer. You don't wake up and say, oh, I want to go out here and be exposed to the worst of freaking humanity. That's what I want to do when I grow up. No, you do it because there is an out. There's an out for poverty. Most police officers are born in an impoverished environment, a socially inept environment. That's also one of the reasons why you only need a GED or a high school diploma to become an officer. And in some cases, it's a buddy system. You don't even have to have that. You just need to know somebody, particularly if they're in the family. So you're coming from abject poverty. Now, in the white community,
no, that was black police officers. You were saying that was black police officers.
Well, no, I'm going to give you the dichotomy between the two. So, white police officers coming from impoverished communities are called poor white trash. They don't want to be poor white trash. Nobody wants to be that. So they're going to come out and they hate everybody. They hate themselves. They hate quote unquote Negroes, niggers, and niggas. They hate everything black. They hate anything there because you have not been educated. Right? You're coming from an academically and economically oppressed community. So you have been socialized to hate. You have been socialized to have complete and total disdain for what you were born into that you didn't necessarily ask for, but you have been socialized in racism. I had an interview, one of my experts on my show, Dr. Luann Brizendine, showed us that we had a show called Hardwired Hate. When you were born in a family, and the family has a white supremacist mindset or attitude, that becomes hardwired in your brain. It is a hard wire of hate, and you hate everybody. And the more uneducated you are, the more detrimental you are to yourself, to your communities, and to your families. Then you look around and you say, well, I don't have education. I can't go to college. I can't get a high-paying job. I don't have the academia for it. I don't have the economics to pay for it. Oh, okay, law enforcement. Okay, I have to take this test, which is a difficult test, but nonetheless, you have enough reading and writing comprehension skills, hopefully, to be able to pass and get on. Okay, now here you are, this racially socialized white supremacist, now with a gun and a badge and the right to kill people. And we all know what is inherent in policing. Policing was created and invented to keep slaves in line. That's when policing really became a thing. Before that, it was the church that was actually the law enforcement in this land. And so you would, the minister, the priest, or whatever would reprimand you. The church would reprimand you. But then when there were slaves who were trying to escape, rightfully so, they even developed this thing called drapetomania, where, running from slavery was mental illness. That's how crazy this shit got. But so the church said, we need a force. We need something else to make sure that these slaves, this is where the papers and all that stuff come from. Show me your papers. Show me your ID. When Trump said, I want to see Barack Obama's papers, that was the trope. That was what was deeply embedded in us, and we were really upset about that. So this is where it comes from. Now, with black cops, African-American cops, both male and female, also coming from social inequity, coming from poverty, coming from an academically oppressed community, but they're also coming from racism. So you have that and all of that trauma that has been built up and stored up in you from birth to whatever age you decide to go into the force, or forced to go into the force because you don't have any other options. You're able to have a job, have health care for your family, able to pay your bills. But then the African-American cop on a force has to deal with not only the baseline trauma that they come from and that they're exposed to as rookies, they got to deal with the racism that is entrenched in the policing process, in the force. Also, now that's the racism. Then there's the class issue. So classism, you are the lowest ranking officer, you are a rookie, you basically ain't shit. You get treated like shit. Anything you do and say, they're going to reprimand you. You're walking on eggshells. You've got to cross your T's, dot your I's, which is why many officers have learned to lie on their reports because they know if I put the truth in, I could be either sued, bring lawsuits to the city, and so there's just this incredible pressure, and so. Now you have these police officers who are out here. What happened in my city, Sacramento, Stephon Clark. You had a black cop, you had a white cop. And they say, well, it wasn't racially motivated because it was a black cop and a white cop. Well, the black cop has no power in law enforcement because the moment they do, they're going to lose benefits, pensions, promotions. They're going to be targeted. And it's the worst thing and they have nobody to go to complain to, because you can't step outside of that blue line. So that creates another level of trauma. You feel trapped. You can't get out. So you have to do what? You have to go along to get along so you can survive and hopefully get to a point where you can become a captain or higher ranking official within the system. But you're fucked up. You're mentally ill. Literally, you're mentally ill, and you're trying to do the right thing, be the right thing. And most coming into the force are trying to be good people, but it's not designed that way because of the massive amounts of trauma from so many different areas and angles that body is being tormented by. So you have this African American, and then again, if you're female, you have to deal with the racism and then the sexism that is inherent. And so, it's one of those things where you say, I'm just going to go home and kick the cat, because if you have to, anybody got, you got pets, those pets are catching fucking hell right now because it's, I can't, some of you hit your wife, but you don't want to hit your wife. You don't want to beat your kids. The dog is going to catch hell is all I'm saying. And the goldfish is not going to make it, so you got to figure out how I'm going to deal with this trauma that is built up inside of me. And you don't, whatever time you get off of your shift, that's not enough time to decompress from the trauma that you've experienced on that shift. You've experienced racism, you've experienced bigotry, you've experienced sexism, you've experienced people's heads blown off, stabbings, children dying, decomposed bodies, the scent, the smell of all of that crime and trauma. Guess what? I got to get up and go to work the next day and do it all over again.
Right.
You're batshit crazy. It's the trauma response that is inside of you is overwhelming. So let's go back to what I call the trauma triangle. The trauma triangle starts with what's known as genetic trauma. There are many different terms for it. Dr. Joy DeGruy, when we're dealing with it from a racialized perspective, it's called post-traumatic slave syndrome, PTSS. So we have a genetic memory is another term for it. Epigenetics is the scientific term for it. And this is trauma that is transferable. It's transferred from the egg in the womb, and it goes back 14 generations. So that's about 350 years of trauma. So white bodies have the trauma that they've inflicted on black bodies for 350 years. So that's a genetic memory that is conserved and brought forth. Black bodies have 350 years of genetic trauma from being abused by these white bodies. And so now you come out of the womb and you already have certain proclivities and personalities of trauma that is within you. You know how you see a kid and they act a certain way or say a certain thing, and you say, that kid has been here before. Have you ever heard that term?
Right.
That's genetic trauma that you're looking at. That is epigenetics. That is a genetic memory that child has passed on and carried on, and it manifests differently in each body. So now that child, that black child, is born into what we call racial battle fatigue. There's a constant signal. I wrote a book called The Hidden Signal. The hidden signal is this racial battle fatigue where initially the black child is exposed to their mother, father, hopefully, their sisters, brothers, aunts, uncles in their community. And it's mostly a black identity community. So that child is beginning to have a black identity until they're exposed to media and they're exposed to education, whether that's in kindergarten or in grammar school. The cartoons that they view are white European people with European voices. They don't see themselves in the cartoons that they're laughing at and enjoying. The dolls that they're playing with or action figures they're playing with are white. The first concept of a deity or a god or something higher are European bodies. And so they start to lose a sense of self. And so probably around the ages of 5, 6, 7, that black child begins to dissipate and deteriorate depending upon the understanding of their family situation, particularly if there's not a male figure in the family, father is not there, or if there's domestic violence, or if just the father is emotionally unavailable or the mother is emotionally unavailable. There's that dysfunction that's there. The child then starts to identify and say, well, where can I go? Because this is what trauma does. Trauma is the first programming of all children. How can I not feel trauma? The body does this automatically because the child doesn't have the ability to think, to reason. Their nervous systems are not fully developed. And so this is why Anthony Robbins says that the body is designed to seek pleasure and avoid pain. So how do I avoid pain? If I am around white people, if I am around and surrounded by Europeans, then in order to do that, I must smile, I must show my teeth, I must crack jokes, I must make them laugh so they can feel comfortable, so I won't feel any kind of way. They won't harm me, they won't threaten me. And this is how you start to create what I call the concept of the Negro, or the third frequency in my metaphysical frequencies framework work. Where, you start to go along to get along. But if you are impoverished, then you are being shown that it's good to be a nigga, which I call fourth frequency. And that nothing as nigga or real nigga syndrome starts to kick in. And so this child now starts looking at the community that they're in, the family that they're in. They see the drug dealer, they see the pimp, they see the music videos, they see the hip hop, they listen to the hip hop music. And so they start taking on that identity because they're rebelling against the white supremacy where they're not accepted. And they don't want to be, quote unquote, the Negro, because that's what we call the sellouts and, you that proper nigga. And so you don't want to be reprimanded for that. You want to be able to fit in. So you end up with these two identities. And I talked about this when I was doing the piece on Gayle King, what happens to the black body when it's born. And I'll get back on the police officers in a minute, but I just want to kind of take a deep dive into this so you can understand what is happening to you, because there's three bodies that we're dealing with. We're dealing with white body supremacy, police or blue bodies, and black bodies. And so there's a relationship in those three bodies as it relates to the African American child. So this African American child is trying to find an identity, and they're only given two choices. You either be a good Negro, go to school, get a job, get a good education, or you out here in these streets and you become a real ass nigga or a thug, or, women become thoughts, bitches, hoes, baby mamas, baby daddies. We know all of the epithets. When we saw Snoop Dogg coming out calling Gayle a no good dirty dog bitch, that's coming from the streets. That's where he's from. Snoop Dogg is not a scholar.
Right.
Snoop Dogg didn't go to college, family. I'm just saying, I'm not saying what he did was right. I'm saying what he did was who he is.
Right.
And if you're going to hate him for calling Gayle a bitch, you can't listen to none of his music because that's what his music and hip hop and gangster rap was about. He's coming from his own personal experience. And so the problem that we have is that we can't judge the lens that we see through. Give you an example. One day I was looking for my glasses. I tore my damn house up looking for my damn glasses. I'm like, where the fuck is my glasses? I go to the car and I go and I look for my glasses, stand down under the seat. I look up and I look in the rearview mirror and I have my glasses on.
I think we've all done that one time or another.
Yeah. Well, I'm like, man, I'm really batshit crazy over here. So my point is, you can't see what you're looking through. So you have to step outside and ask yourself, when did I become a Negro, or how did I become a nigger? Because those are the only two choices that was given to me. I never had an opportunity to be human. I don't even know what that is. Racial battle fatigue is designed for you never to find out that you are a human being and what that looks like. You never know peace. You never have a sense, quote unquote, of self. Police officers who are lucky in the sense that they are able to get some level of higher education, that higher education and socialization allows them to have a level of space and agency. They're still traumatized, but they're not as, what's the word? I don't want to say illiterate, but uneducated from the perspective of coming into the force with just a high school diploma. So because you're going to college, you have to interact with certain levels of scholarship and other people, and you have to learn how to socialize. And so that socialization, in many cases, this is one of the reasons why some of the advocates are saying police officers at least need 2 years of education so that they won't come out and be so trigger happy, because the lower your education, the more trauma you're going to have. So the more people you're going to kill inadvertently, just because that's just your bag of trauma. Walking around with a badge and a gun. You're not a human being anymore. You're a bundle of trauma responses. So when we look at this trauma triangle, so the first one is genetic. That's what we are born with. The second type of trauma is called decontextualized trauma. Decontextualized trauma is trauma when you don't have a timestamp or a time date when that trauma was imprinted into your body. And so maybe you were molested, maybe you saw something, maybe you were abused, beaten, maybe your parents left you. I was just watching Tommy Davidson and his book and his story. He was left in a trash can.
Oh, wow.
So that's a trauma imprint. That's a trauma imprint of abandonment and betrayal. Well, we come here with this sense of abandonment and betrayal because if our mommy doesn't love us, our daddy doesn't love us, or isn't around, the child blames whatever is wrong in their life, in their community, in their family. They blame it on themselves because they don't have a nervous system and a brain that's fully developed and functional. So now you have this sense of abandonment, and that's a decontextualized trauma. Now, what happens with trauma when it's stored in the body, it's decontextualized and you don't know it's there, it starts to look like personality. And this is the work of Resmaa Menakem, who wrote a book called My Grandmother's Hands, one of the best books ever on black body trauma, white body trauma, and law enforcement trauma. Decontextualized trauma looks like personality, and so we all know and have said, "Oh, that's just the way Captain is. That's just the way he is. He's always been that way." Well, when you say something like that, that's when it becomes personality. It's really the trauma that has become personality. When that personality becomes family members, it starts to look like culture. Right. So now we have the European culture, we have the African American culture, we have the Muslim culture, we have all of these trauma bodies crashing and clashing into one another, and whoever has the most amount of trauma always wins. So write that down. Whoever has the most amount of trauma always wins. So when you're dealing with police officers, guess who has the most amount of trauma? They do. You have trauma too, as when they pull you over for whatever reason, or even if you're targeted. But they have a gun, and so that trauma is always going to win. They're going to take you down and take you out. So you must know that going into any type of conversation with a police officer, that they have the most amount of trauma. It ain't about good or bad. It's trauma. You're dealing with trauma, and it's a response, and it's reflexive. You can't think in that moment. That's why it's called agency or space. When you do trauma work, it gives you a sense of agency and space. But when you are in a trauma event or a traumatic event where your life might be on the line, the police officer's life might be on the line, or at least they think they are, even if it's not, you might think that your life is in danger. And so both of you are trauma responses coming together, but someone has a higher level of trauma and a trigger that can take you out. So you have to learn what you're dealing with first before you deal with law enforcement, because all law enforcement, regardless of how many years they've been on the force, have the initiation going from a rookie to whatever the next level is how much trauma can you take? That's really what it is. How much trauma have you been exposed to? How much trauma can you handle? And can you do your job? And if you can and go along and get along, if you can deal with the classism, the racism, the sexism, then you get promoted. Okay? So that's decontextualized trauma. Go ahead, brother.
Certainly you're kind of painting with a broad brush. All police officers are dealing with this, or a majority, or to say that all white police officers grew up in impoverished homes. I mean, especially
no, that's not true. And I don't mean to bring there. You're absolutely right. This is not a either or. It's a something and. But when we are dealing with a community that is not necessarily educated, not necessarily economically viable, you're going to have more trauma in those communities, white, black, Asian, than you are if you come from a well-to-do family. Now, but if you are a well-to-do family in America, and you are European, you have a certain bias against the other, right? Dr. Jacqueline Battlelor, who wrote the book Birth of a White Nation, says white people do not think about race until someone of color is in front of them. Otherwise, they're oblivious to the impact of their whiteness that they have on black bodies or people of color. So this nation was designed and created for white. If you watch any of my interviews, and I talked about this in the Gayle interview, 1681, between 1664 and 1681 is when white people were invented. Now imagine you think you're white, but you're not. But you've been born into it, and it's generational, and all the institutions support this concept called whiteness. Whiteness was designed and developed for two reasons: to protect the 1% and to divide humanity. In 1664, 1681, there were laws that came down in the colonies from the lawmakers called anti-miscegenation. And there were three laws in that. There was a cluster of laws, but there were three laws that put us into the conversation that you and I are having today, and is responsible for your career as a police officer, your idea of being a black man, your understanding, and your podcast and everything that you do. Those three laws were: one, a person of African descent could no longer vote or run for office. Second, person of African descent could not own guns or gunpowder, so you couldn't protect your family and you couldn't eat. and two, a person of African descent could no longer sue or take legal action against this new designation of humanity called white. And so the black man was targeted. The African man was targeted and taken out of the role of patriarchy. Now imagine that this was 100 years before the first meeting of Congress, before the U.S. Constitution was written, before the forefathers were born. So this was what we call institutionalized. And it was generational and historic. So when you're born, you think you're white. You're not. You're European, but you think you're white, but you're not. So you have a certain ideology that you're going to act and say, this is right. This is why when Black Lives Do Matter. I remember listening to one of your podcasts, and the cop, I'm assuming it was a white cop, I think had T-shirts said, Black Lives Splatter and Blue Lives Matter. So that comes directly from a white supremacy and a whiteness concept. That's the racial battle fatigue that Black bodies within law enforcement and outside of law enforcement have to deal with.
Right. Because
of those anti-miscegenation laws, women, Black women, the African woman, albeit being raped and molested on a daily basis, had the right to be a woman. Black men, African men in this country, never had a right to be a male patriarch because it would get them killed, because it was a direct threat to white supremacy. So you might be male, but you might not know what it means to be a man, because that's something we have to figure out. Because the moment we are men and act like men, we are demonized. And so we have to understand what has happened to us. This is why I say nothing is wrong with Black people. Something happened to Black people.
Right.
So you fast forward, when you look at the anti-miscegenation laws, where, the Casual Killing Act, it was okay to kill a slave who was misbehaving or trying to escape. And we see that in law enforcement. When a cop kills a Black body, predominantly they get off. These are the things that we don't understand have not only a historical connection, but it has a genetic and epigenetic connection as well. Those Virginia lawmakers that created this concept of anti-miscegenation and invented this new designation called white, created white supremacy at that moment. And that was what this country is fighting for and fighting against. All military, all policing, all law enforcement is to protect that 1%. Because in policing, that they are going to send you to the poorest communities, because the poorest communities cannot defend themselves. They can't take legal action because they don't have the money, they don't have the education to fight whatever the situation is. And so poverty in America was invented and created. That's the only way that you're able to have a job in law enforcement, is that you go into these, because if you go into a white community that sells drugs and does drugs far greater than any marginalized community, you're going to have to, those people know the judges, they know attorneys, they have money, and they're going to fight your case. As we know in policing, when you lose a case, you get a demerit. So you don't want a case lost when it goes to the DA. So you want to stack your cards and put, as the comedians would say, you want to put 100 on 10. So it's the system. It's not the fault of, quote unquote, the individual. It's the systemic historical concept that was created prior to all of us being born. And we're being born into something that is a lie. We're being born into something that is false. We're being born into a trauma that we didn't ask for. And we have not known what peace looks like and what it feels like. And the body, the human body, is designed to seek pleasure and avoid pain. The third type of trauma in the trauma triangle is known as vicarious trauma, or secondary trauma. Secondary vicarious trauma is when you wake up in the morning and you are minding your own damn business. You turn on your phone, if you have Facebook or Twitter or whatever social media app you have on, you see Philando Castile being shot to death in front of his 4-year-old child in the backseat of the car. You weren't there. You don't even know where it happened or when it happened, but you feel some kind of way. Trauma imprint is imprinted in you, and it connects to your already stored genetic trauma and your decontextualized trauma. And so now when you see this happening over and over again, you see how Black Lives Matter can be formed, that this is Black Lives Matter is a trauma response to the trauma that they are experiencing vicariously, because they weren't there when Eric Gardner was choked to death, or Alton Sterling was shot to death, and Sandra Bland was found murdered, or should I say suicide. But we know that if she hadn't been in custody, she would be alive today. So that's a vicarious trauma. As it relates to law enforcement, when you're a rookie, and you'll tell me that if I'm correct in that, because I don't know all of the inner workings of law enforcement, but when you're a rookie, you get assigned someone who becomes your partner that teaches you the ropes. So they already have their trauma empathy. So you go in and you get connected to somebody who already is traumatized, but has found whatever aspect of how they're going to deal with the trauma of the day. And you have to go along to get along. You go out on a call, and you see something that might make you literally throw up. It's because police officers, law enforcement are not supposed to, a human body is not supposed to see somebody's head blown off, somebody stabbed to death, open wounds, blood, guts, all of the worst of humanity. The body is not designed to see that. You weren't there. You were called and said, you have to go. And because you were a cop, you can't fight, you can't flight, you can't freeze. And the annihilation has already happened when you arrive on the scene. And so now vicariously, you have been traumatized. And that trauma is stored, and now it's in that triangle. And you have to deal with that the best way you can. So you might go and drink, you might go and drug, you might go and have a sex addiction. You might go and have a domestic violence addiction. All of this, and then at some point you just say enough is enough, and you take a gun and you blow your brains out. This is what is happening to law enforcement. So I know some people listening to this will think that I'm siding with law enforcement. I'm not siding with law enforcement. I'm siding with trauma to help you understand what happens to you when you are socialized a particular way, and trauma is embedded in your body, and this is how you respond. Trauma does not have a thinking mind. It is reflexive. It's a reflex. It's like when the doctor hits you on that knee and you kick the doctor in the balls, that's trauma. It's a reflexive response. It's a trigger. When you are given a badge and a gun, and you're coming from particularly if you're coming from a marginalized community, you are a danger to yourself and a danger to others, but you are protected by the blue, what they call the blue wall. And the other thing that people don't understand about law enforcement is, as I said, and I kind of mentioned it earlier, you have so much vulnerability dealing with the classism of law enforcement within the system, where you have to go along to get along, because if you don't, you'll be marginalized and ostracized, and your family could even be targeted. You could be set up. The worst of the worst can happen to you. But one of the things that nobody really understands in terms of law enforcement and the legal aspects of it is that if law enforcement continuously loses their cases, law enforcement loses its power and it loses its level of authority. And now you have a situation where nobody's protected. And so this is why they err more on lying, cheating, doing what, false police reports, whatever they have to do, because if the system collapses, we're back in the dark ages. We're back in the times when the individual became their own law enforcement. I know some people might say, I wouldn't mind that. Yes, you would. Yes, you would. You do not want that shit to happen. I know you might feel some kind of way, but there's moments when you need to call a police officer and just deal with that. And thank God that they're there, because if they weren't, As I said, you go back into the dark ages. So imagine the level of psychological, emotional, and physiological pressure that a law enforcement person is under 24 hours a day. And they never get a chance to rest. Like I said, in military, you have something to look forward to where you say, okay, I'm not going to be in theater forever. I get to come home to my family and I at least get to experience post traumatic stress disorder. Police officers never experience the post. It's always traumatic because they have to get up the next day and do it again. Psychiatry and psychology does not work in police office, in trauma work. This is why when they say, well, you need to go and debrief and talk to a psychologist or a psychiatrist, that's the dumbest shit you can possibly do. It's like putting a Band-Aid on an open fucking wound. Trauma is stored in the body, not in the mind. Psychologists and psychiatrists deal with the mind. And if they drug you, then you're really screwed.
Now, when you say
the trauma is still embedded.
Right. So if it's not in the mind, then where is it? You're talking about this trauma.
Trauma is stored in the body.
Right.
When you feel trauma, you feel your chest tightening. You might have shortness of breath.
Okay.
Your heart races. You get tightness in your body. Your muscles flex and tense up. That's the trauma response in the body. It's called the vagus nervous system, VEGUS, vagus nervous system. It's trauma is stored in the body. It is manifested through what's called cognitive biases, like confirmation bias and halo and horns bias. That's a whole nother, that's called decision theory. That's another level of understanding of how the brain, the mind, tries to deal with the trauma, because the trauma is trying to protect the body. The trauma is actually a response to protect the body away from pain and seek pleasure. It doesn't give a damn how it does it, and it's usually maladaptive. And so when we're dealing with racial battle fatigue, there is going to be maladaptive behaviors. As I told you on the phone when we talked earlier, that Dr. William A. Smith, who and Dr. Tommy J. Curry, who wrote the paper, a peer-reviewed paper on racial battle fatigue, the black body, particularly black men, when they're exposed to white spaces for an extended period of time in their career, their morbidity rate increases as their income rate increases. And so the more money you make, which is the goal for all of us trying to move away from poverty, we end up becoming sicker mentally and physically. So there's a whole list of the psychological and physiological problems that occur: high blood pressure, diabetes, all of these things that we think are just natural to a black body. No, it comes from trauma, and it comes from being exposed to white spaces and having to suck it up, having to go along and get along. And that is not natural. That's not normal. And so when there's no escape, no trauma work that can be done to anesthetize and inoculate you, you just take that shit in, you suck it up, you deal with it the best way you can, whether that's whatever the maladaptive behavior is, that's where your addictions come from. Diabetes and all of this, that's not natural to the human body. There's something that happened to you. But we make it look like that's the natural proclivity. Cancers and certain levels of cancer that we get, all of that comes from some level of trauma built up and stored up in the body.
Powerful stuff, man. That was certainly a mouthful. And so we went on from police officers. Let's get to Gayle King in this.
Oh Lord!
Just to get
like Bernie Mac said, "Oh Lord!"
Man, your breakdown of her. Like I said, when we talked before on the phone, man, I really watched it about 4 or 5 times. And it was really just powerful. Your analysis of her. Now you spent a half an hour talking about that. Just give us a brief 2-3 minute synopsis of the problems that Gayle King had, and you also talk about Snoop's response to that. So break that down for us as well. Okay,
so the work that I do, and I call it the 4 metaphysical frequencies and the hidden signal. It's 4 frequencies that I call. First frequency is our direct signal, original signal to our creator. Second frequency is the European signal of white supremacy. So white supremacy created 2 other frequencies. Second frequency created this third frequency called the Negro. when white supremacy was installed in this country, the African, which was originally an African, could no longer be an African. In order for an African to, after slavery ended, we became Negroes, and that's the only thing that we could do. And there was a certain boundary and certain attitudes, characteristics, and behaviors that you had to have in order to survive. And even some of us did not, because as we tried to thrive and survive under a white supremacist regime of Jim Crow, we were still Negroes. We were never allowed to be men and women, particularly the black male. The black male was never allowed to be a black man or an African man. And so you had to be a Negro. You had to go along to get along. Yes, sir, no, sir. And so there was a level of classism that came with that, but also obviously a great deal of level of racial pain and torment and trauma that came with that. When Jim Crow ended, when civil rights movement, I don't know what your age is. My age, I'm 50. I'll be 55 this year. I was the first in my family to be born with all of my rights, and so my generation, Generation X, we looked at what the characteristics and behaviors and traits of the Negro. And said, oh, I don't want to be no Negro. I don't want to be no coon. I don't want to be no sellout. I don't want to be like that. And we created the fourth frequency, I call it, the nigger, the real nigger, the thug nigger, the hard nigger. Because, again, we're dealing with and responding to operating within a white supremacist regime. Now, that's how it works with the black male. With the black woman, the lower frequency, fourth frequency, she's a thought. She's a bitch, she's a hoe, she's a baby mama, she's ratchet. When you're dealing with the female Negro who has access to education, is able to make money, they then say, oh, I'm better if I align myself with my white counterparts because I don't want to be a nigger. Because a nigger, female nigger, is going to be that bitch, that hoe, that thought, that ratchet, whatever the lowest form of humanity in that regard. But this is where Snoop Dogg comes from. Snoop Dogg is not a Negro. Snoop Dogg is a straight real nigger. Snoop Dogg is not a scholar, family. So I understand you might feel some kind of way about him calling Gayle a no good dog bitch or whatever the sequence of the words were, even though it doesn't matter, even in any sequence, it was fucked up. But you're asking Snoop to be something that he's never been. You're asking Snoop to be something that his entire life and music is surrounded by and developed by being a real thug nigger. Because that's the only way some of us are able to survive, because we don't have the ability to be Negroes and have education and have money in the family and get a good job and go along to get along. And that ain't right either. So when you look at a Gayle or an Oprah, or you look at Eric Dyson, you look at these people who are scholars and what have you, they are good, go along to get along Negroes, because as much as we don't necessarily like the Negroes or the niggers, but the Negro in particular is a survival mechanism, so that they can at least have some level of space and agency where I'm not the nothing ass nigga, but I'm not, European, but I'm going to align with that European, because it's a level of safety where I get an opportunity to breathe and not have to face my trauma of really what has happened to me. So now,
you think that comes from Michael Eric Dyson? You think you think he's like that? I never.
When I saw the piece that Michael Eric Dyson said, everything he said was right, but it was not what he said, it was what he didn't say. Everything he was talking about had nothing to do with really Kobe Bryant losing his wife and his daughter's life. It had nothing to do with Lisa Leslie. It had nothing. He was talking about, we got to support black women, we got to love black women, and yes, we do. But this had nothing to do with that. What Gayle did was assault Kobe Bryant, his dead body, and his dead daughter. That was an assault. That was an attack. Yes, you have the right to ask a question, but you do not have the right to dig in and become biased when she said, well, how do you know, Lisa?
Yeah.
That was the shit that broke. That was it.
Yeah, that was
the other question, bringing it up, was journalistic. I can see that.
Right.
I don't agree with it now, understand. But it's when you dug in and said, how do you know? So now you were attacking Lisa. She just lost a friend.
There was no right answer to that question. Either I agree with you.
There was no right answer.
I saw it with my own eyes. Yeah, Gayle, he did it all the time. Or when she said, I don't know. Well, how would you know? There's no right answer to the question.
There's no right answer. So that was the setup, and that was the concept of the Negro. That's when you now understand Gayle. Gayle is unconscious to this shit, man. She didn't know. She thought she was doing what she was supposed to do because that's who she is. She's been raised and she's been proselytized and she's been groomed to be a good Negro, right? She aligns with Charlie Rose. Now, she worked with Charlie Rose, I don't know how many years.
Yeah.
He was raping and molesting people all of that goddamn time.
She didn't see it.
You didn't see it. But you gonna come out on Kobe? Oh, hell to the no. As Whitney Houston would say if she was here right with us right now.
Right.
So you have to understand that we're dealing with a fight and a clash between the Negro and the nigger consciousness and mindset and false racial identity. Negroes and niggers are false racial identities. That's not who we are. But that's what they give us. That's what we are allowed to be in this country. And then when we look at Oprah, now I can go back to when I come from, I'm in California, but I'm from Chicago. I wrote a book. I had a .com back in the day, and I got an opportunity to interview Stedman Graham when his first book came out, Build Your Own Life Brand. And he became a mentor of mine, and I would go down to NBC Towers and sit and he would just tell me about how the Oprah brand was built and how he was part of that institution that built Oprah. Well, what made Oprah, when she came from Baltimore to Chicago, there was a show called AM Chicago that was hosted by a curly-haired, red-haired, kinky-haired white dude, was really weird-looking, and another person, and then Oprah came in and was part of that AM Chicago, but she had this, what they call a je ne sais quoi. She had some kind of a thing about her that really resonated with the Chicago community, and she decided when she got her show that at the time, Phil Donahue was the #1 talk show host on the planet. Soap operas was the #1 daytime activity for white women, but black women as well, but predominantly white women, because at that time, the white male was able to make enough money to support an entire family, and the wife stayed at home to take care of the kids and do all the whatever the job duties of that is. And white women were just lost in soap operas. And so when Oprah said, "I'm going to do a show that speaks to all of the things that basically white women, suburban women, are going through because their men are not there." And that was the beginning of, that's why white women love Oprah. Oprah was never designed for a black audience. She was never a part of us in that level of community, if you will. Not taking anything away from Oprah, because she had to go along to get along, and she had to either become that thug and thought, or she had to become a Negro. And so she became a Negro and said, how can I make white people, how can I make white women in particular feel safe? How can I make them feel secure? How can I make them feel like they matter? How can I make them feel good about themselves and give them something that they can look forward to on a daily basis? And that was the creation of Oprah Winfrey. And so Gayle, her friend, was part of that process. So you have to go, there's a concept in African psychology called Sankofa, where you go back to come forward. So in this situation, we have to go back to come forward. What made a Gayle King? What makes an Oprah Winfrey? So if you are designed to do a show that supports women, particularly white women European ideals, of course the black man is going to catch hell because you have never done. I was an Oprahite. I was in the green room with Oprah. I have met Oprah. I've been to Harpo. I know some of this stuff intimately, and she's never done a positive show about black men ever in 25 years of being on the air. That was not the market that she was trying to get to. She was trying to get to how men abuse women and what can we do about it. And black men in particular was on the lowest scale of the totem pole. So when you see a Gayle King go in on Lisa Leslie, all of that, you remember I gave you the triangle on trauma.
Right.
That trauma is embedded in us. And when we saw Gayle King, who we weren't necessarily, let's just be clear. We didn't necessarily like Gayle in the first damn place, but we dealt with it. We all have, come on, family. We all have people that we like. I'm just, I'm going to put you on pause. I'm just going to deal with you, but I don't really necessarily like your ass, But when you go in, so we were kind of looking for a reason because we were already pissed off at Oprah about what she did with Michael Jackson and then what she was going to do with Russell Simmons. And what she had not done with Harvey Weinstein.
I think that was the bigger point. I think that was the bigger point. Well, she didn't come out.
So we already had we were already feeling some kind of way. And then Gayle was the nail in the coffin. When she said, but how would you know, Lisa? I didn't say it verbally, but I said, is this bitch crazy? I said, I did a Snoop Dogg because I came from that nigga mindset. That's where I come from. So I'm keeping it real with you, family, so you can understand when Snoop Dogg, that was a traumatic, reflexive response from being that real thug nigga in the streets. You should not expect some type of cogent, articulate, intellectual libation from fucking Snoop Dogg. Come on. It's never going to happen.
Right.
And so he did what he felt reflexively. It's like, how could you do such a thing? You no good, dirty dog, da, 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 da. So this is what happened to Gayle. So I feel some kind of way about Gayle because I understand what happened to her. And this is why I say nothing is wrong with our people. Something happened to our people. But you have to take, as I used the analogy earlier, you have to take your glasses off to look at when did you become a Negro or when did you become a nigger? And what does that mean and what does that look like? But you can't see yourself if you're wearing the glasses in which you are searching for and looking through.
Where do we go from here? This idea has been tearing the community apart. I really think that this whole situation has really sparked a lot of debate, sparked a lot of interest, and this whole male, black female dichotomy that's going on. People are still arguing about it. Do we get any better from here? Where do we go from here? Should we forgive Gayle and Oprah? Are they ever going to get where we're coming from?
No, they're not. The system in which they're in what I call a racial battle fatigue bubble. So, as I said, racial battle fatigue happens when you are in predominantly white spaces. And so in the female, racial battle fatigue, in order for the black female body to be secure and to have less trauma, because you have to understand Gayle and Oprah have and are dealing with on a daily basis sexism, classism, and racism. And so that's an affront to their female black body.
That's almost hard to fathom. I mean, I understand that Gayle King gets $11 million a year. Oprah's a billionaire. Right. How are they still suffering from that?
Because somebody wrote them the check.
Right.
And whoever wrote them the check are the billionaires that made Oprah. The millionaires and billionaires that are able to write a $11 million check a year. So you, just as you are in law enforcement, you have higher ups that you have to be accountable to, and they might treat you like shit. And so, not to even say that there are black men who are dealing with sexism from European men and European women, and you have to deal with it. Now, men are going to deal with it differently than women, but you have to understand that when Oprah says she's owned, she's owned. Because the moment Oprah comes out and starts to talk about real issues in the Black community, those European sponsors, those European companies, those European networks, those European syndicators, those European billionaires are going to say hell to the no. And so she has to go along to get along. You don't get, I remember it was Eddie Griffiths, the comedian on Vlad TV. He says, when you're Black in entertainment, you don't get out clean.
Yeah, I remember him saying that, yeah.
When you are a Negro or a nigger, you don't get out clean. And so all of us, by matter of degree, have had to code switch, have had to go along to get along to survive. And some of us do not. And when we see a Gayle King, it reminds us of the abuse, the assault, the betrayal, the abandonment that is deeply embedded in our Black bodies, that we have been born with, that we come here with, and that we have dealt with our entire lives. And so, yes, as Ricky Smiley said, Gayle, there's a point when you have to say, yeah, I could have asked the question, but now I don't think I'm going to go in just yet. It's too soon. And she didn't do that because she was trying to do an R. Kelly interview. Okay.
Right.
And we said nothing when she did R. Kelly because R. Kelly shit was so egregious. We were like, yeah, fuck it. We can't even, you know, like Dave Chappelle, when he did his piece about pleading the fifth, you know, we couldn't plead the fifth for R. Kelly. We were like, yo, dude, that was fucked up. And so when Gayle went in on R. Kelly, that was acceptable. But when she did the same tactic on Lisa Leslie, oh, hell no, that's not going to fly, Gayle. You should know better. And you should have a barometer within you to know better than to do that, particularly because you've never said anything about someone you consider your friend, Charlie Rose, who has raped and molested so many damn women, allegedly. And then Harvey Weinstein, you've got photos with him. You don't say anything about him. And then Matt Lauer.
Right.
Oh, you don't say anything about. So two wrongs don't make a right, Gayle. You in this new culture with the millennials, you have been canceled. And Oprah, you have been canceled too. You were already on the periphery with us. You were already kind of, as the kids say, suspect. But now the shit is out in the open. It's been hit the fan, and you've got some, as we say in the community, you got some splaining to do with an S, not the EX, but with an S. You got some splaining to do. And I don't know if they can explain their way out of this, because once our minds are made up because of our trauma, I don't know if we can trust you again. And I don't know what we can do to trust Gayle and Oprah again. And I love those women. They're traumatized women. They're beautiful women. They're good-hearted women, but they are in a cage. White supremacy is a corral. It's a cage. It's a control that at that level, and I've been around millionaires and billionaires. I have interviewed so many celebrities. I have been around so many highly, highly successful people in the European community and in the Black community. I know exactly the fear in the upper echelon Black community is I don't want anything. I have worked my ass off. I have sacrificed and suffered immense trauma to be a Negro, to get to a Negro. Because I came from the nigga, I went to a Negro. You understand? And so I'm not going to do anything to rock that boat. I'm not going to do anything to mess that up. And I'm not going to do anything to go back to being that nothing ass nigga. And in the white community, most whites don't want to go back to being poor white trash. So there's a level of amnesia and silence that comes with this trauma response of racial battle fatigue that affects both sides.
Certainly no one is buying Gayle King's explanation that CBS did it and she didn't know what was going on. That's called dirty pain and clean pain and trauma healing. So I would just dirty call it a pain. Lie. It was just
that too. No shit, right? Yeah.
You've been in the game now for how many years? You don't know about editing. You don't know about what are you saying?
100%, 100%. I said that in my on my piece. I said you blaming this on the network. If they didn't have anything to edit, it wouldn't be shit for them to put out.
Right. Right.
So in the concept of trauma, the dirty pain is when you justify your wrongdoing and you blame it on something else. You deflect and say, "Oh, I am a." And she came out there. It was laughable. I am appalled. I was just so disturbed that they did this. I woke up this morning and I saw what they edited, what they did, and it was egregious. And this is where Snoop Dogg would say, "Bitch, are you out of your goddamn mind?" This is what we feel, and we're like, "Come on, Gayle, that's dirty pain." Clean pain is just taking ownership and saying, like Ricky Smiley said, and I think Steve Harvey even said, "Gayle, come out and say, I'm sorry, I was wrong, I fucked up, and we'll be cool because we're forgiving people. We'd be cool with that. But you're going to come out and blame some shit on the editing of the network? You had to submit the shit to the network to be edited, Gayle."
Right.
Come on, Gayle, you know better.
Right.
But she's now fighting, well, if I come out and say I was wrong, what does that say about me journalistically? Because I have to appease these white people and keep that $11 million check coming in. So she's in a quandary. She's in a really, really bad space. Oprah has enough money where she can literally wake up tomorrow and say, "Fuck it, go to Egypt somewhere and you never see her again." Gayle ain't got that. 11 million can run out. I'm just saying. So Gayle got to figure this shit out.
That's the problem I have with Oprah is that, I mean, obviously I don't know her, but I would think by now she's made it and she should be writing the checks and she should have enough gumption to say, this is what I think, what I feel. Okay, maybe her network will fall, but at least you can put it out there. This is what, and it just lets me know, and I agree with a lot of what you're saying, that that whole battle fatigue and where she is mentally, maybe it was her past childhood traumas or whatever, that she just doesn't feel this way about black men and will not defend them, and possibly believes that we're no good. I know the people have come to her defense and saying that she's put a lot of people through college, and yeah, that's great. Yep. You can write a check from a distance to help people. But when it comes to those intimate spaces, and particularly this instance where it's something that is so near and dear to her own heart about trauma and sexuality and stuff, that she just can't bring herself to cross that hurdle. And it's just too much pain for her. But I really am disappointed that she continues to put out these hit pieces and to defend this kind of stuff. And it's really just inexcusable at this point.
It is. And to your point, there's a concept that says if you knew better, you would do better. Not necessarily. Because when you have whatever has happened to Oprah, whether it was, again, direct trauma from black men or a black man, or vicarious trauma in terms of how maybe her mother, her family members were treated by black men who were broken and traumatized, she hasn't healed that. That's a deep level of trauma that she has yet to heal. And that allows her to stay on point. The other piece that we just also have to deal with is this. If I am able and get to a point where I can drive a Bentley, I don't want to go back to driving a Lexus. Now, both are luxury vehicles, but there's something about that Bentley, baby, that you are separate from the world. You are insulated and isolated, and you are inoculated from the daily trauma, racial battle fatigue from white supremacy and from the lower frequencies of what we call the nigger frequency. And so even though you could go and retire and live a great life, her level of success and how European women basically have made her a modern day Mother Teresa. That's a drug that she can't give up, bro. I'm sorry. She just cannot give that up. She can't go away from that. It's like this is going to tickle some people and maybe piss some people off, but I'm from Chicago. I remember when Michael Jordan started playing baseball and we were like, what the fuck are you doing, Mike? What the hell? Dude, you can't play no goddamn baseball. You are a basketball player. but the drug of competition and why he was gambling and all, it's an addiction. And it's once that addiction, which is based on trauma, is in you, you can't go back. The hardest thing for athletes to do is to retire.
Yeah.
It's the hardest thing in the world to do. Even though they know it's going to bang up their bodies, abuse them, and hurt them and harm them, they can't let it go because it's the one place. You know, it's like people who are addicted to religion. People come down on people to say, oh, you shouldn't be in all that church stuff. Let me tell you something. Every 7 days is where Black people can go for a moment or a few hours and have their trauma suspended. Because the moment they're in the parking lot, they get it. Sometimes you ain't even got to get to the goddamn parking lot, and you traumatized in the church parking lot before you just after service. So you have to understand that church, that community, the music, the message gives us a temporary relief from the trauma that I have faced the previous 7 days and the trauma I am about to face in the next 7 days. So that's what's happening, is that we are responding the best way we can to our genetic trauma, our decontextualized trauma, and our vicarious trauma.
Now, explain to me and this will be the last point, explain to me Susan Rice coming after and threatening Snoop Dogg with an army. Did you?
That was some batshit crazy shit. Okay, now you trying to make me Negro Damas right now. You asking shit that I can't even goddamn explain. Well, I'm pretty damn good at what I do, and I'm looking at Susan Rice and say, where in the F is this coming from? What the hell just happened here? Oh, Susan Rice, you are retired. You ain't in nothing. You ain't in government no more. What? And you're going to go after Snoop Dogg? No offense. I'm just trying to tell you. Snoop Dogg might win that damn fight. I'm just telling you because the streets. I'm not saying nothing. You didn't hear that from me. But I know about these streets. We got some shit for you if you came after Snoop Dogg. You're gonna have to level up. There's gonna be some body bags counting. I'm just saying, But really, on a serious note, if there can be such a thing as a serious note on that. You know how our people say you just need to mind your own goddamn business. Sit your little ass down somewhere and let these grown people work out their shit. You ain't got nothing to do with this conversation. So then you have to look at what Susan Rice represents, the Negro. She is married to whiteness, and that's I don't think she did anything in the Obama administration. So you have to understand that 1% concept. Protecting that 1%. White supremacy is when it becomes embedded in the body. And when it becomes embedded in a Black body, you get a Susan Rice. When it becomes embedded, when I say a Black body, it could be just a person of color.
Right.
It's embedded in a Gayle King. It's embedded in an Oprah Winfrey. It's embedded in an Eric Dyson. We've seen it in Steve Harvey, and we love some Steve Harvey because he goes back and forth fighting with this thing that's inside of him. He doesn't know the difference between a Negro and a nigger. He's worth $56 million or 57. Whether he works or not. So he, at that level, you also have to deal with the classism aspect of what money does to you and what it surrounds you with. White people smile at you when you have $1 million in the bank. They even though they might say things and do things, but they don't come at you as if when you are a poor Black person. And you have to deal with that. And you have to understand most of us have never and never will know what it's like to have a 6-figure life or a 7-figure life. Most of us are struggling at 5 figures or less. And as a result of that, we can't even understand the classism issue that comes with the money. and being black or a Negro at the same time. We most of us don't know. So niggas can't see Negroes and Negroes can't see niggas. You understand?
Right.
And that's what's going on. But Susan Rice, please sit your ass down somewhere. And you ain't even got a dog in this fight. And I'm sorry, I got to side with my boy Snoop on this. If you go ahead and bring an army to Snoop Dogg, you will see what hip hop really means. You will understand the power of the hip hop community. You're not going to win that fight. You might win in bullets, but you're going to lose everything you thought you had. It's just not, you can't judge somebody for being passionate about the loss of a friend. Snoop Dogg lost a friend. We lost an icon, somebody that we liked and admired. He lost a personal friend. I don't even know if Susan Rice even likes or cared about Kobe Bryant. So you're not even in the conversation.
Man, thank you so much, man, for breaking that down. I really, really appreciate it. I really want everyone to go check out your video, man, and all your videos, really. But the making of Gayleking and Oprah, which I saw, and I'm going to watch it again because you really were very profound at breaking it down. I really hope that people.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate that.
And I really appreciate you coming on and just doing this. I know I just emailed me back. We just got this thing popping. And I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I was shocked. I was like, "You really want to talk right now?" I'm like, "Okay, let's go. Let's do it."
Well, I was going to try to schedule it for the future, man. But this thing is hot, and I wanted to talk about this whole thing. We could certainly talk again. I'd love to have you back on and just talk about this whole thing about men and women and how we get our communities together. And we really got to break these cycles.
I have a whole thing about that on relationships and marriage and relationships and misogyny and cheating and all. Oh, man, you have to understand what's happened to us, man. Yeah. So nothing's wrong with black people. Something happened to black people.
And I like the way that you word that, man, because a lot of people will try to put us in this box. You know, it's particularly those on the right will say, you know, it's your culture. It's you. And we'd agree with that. And we got to figure out why this has happened. Not that we're inherently, because of some abundance of melanin or African DNA, that we're problematic. No, it's something that's happened to us, and it's our response to this. We got to figure it out. And
you can't be accountable. You can't be accountable for somebody shooting you, and they say stop screaming and stop bleeding.
Right. Absolutely.
Somebody shoots you, you're bleeding, you're hurt, you're screaming, and they tell you don't scream, don't bleed, protest quietly.
Right.
That is a victimization. Or not during the football games. or not, exactly. I got a whole thing on that. Don't get me started because we're going to have to go another hour on that just alone.
Yeah.
Just what happened with the NFL deflecting Black Lives Matter and this whole thing with Kaepernick. So what they're going to do is say, oh, I know what we'll do. We'll get a person of color. So we'll get Shakira and we'll get J-Lo. So now they can't say we're racist because we're working with Hispanics and Latinx people. And so as a result, Super Bowl ain't racist no more. We're not racist. Look at that. We got Shakira. But you don't understand. On the census tip, they don't put down Latinx. They put down white. Latinx people get to be white in this country. And that is a rift that is between those two cultures, between us and them. And so you have to understand what they did is another way to silence the whole Kaepernick thing. But don't get me started because I'll have to go into all the details and all that. I don't want to get into that.
We'll say
that for another time. But go to our YouTube channel and type in the making of Gayleking. That's the title of the video. And you can also go to First Frequency with the number 1stfrequency.com and you can learn about what we're up to.
Man, I really appreciate it, man. I want to have you back.
I appreciate you, brother. I didn't get a chance to exalt you. I read your bio and what you're doing in the community in Connecticut and your life in law enforcement. What you're doing is amazing because just by you doing the podcast is helping you release and relieve your trauma that has been built up and stored up over the 24 years that you were in service. And now you're able to give some of that back and have a level of agency and space to give back to the community in a much greater way. You got your master's degree, you got your associates and your bachelor's. It was amazing what you have done with yourself to continue your level of education as opposed to succumbing to the stress and the pressure that you have been exposed to in your life, brother. So I commend you, and I commend anyone in law enforcement that is trying to do the right thing. And I know what you're going through, and I know what you're growing through. I know some people are going to think I am siding with the man. I am not. I am understanding what happened to people in law enforcement, particularly Black people in law enforcement, and what they are up against is insurmountable. You can't even put it into words sometimes, what you are exposed to in a 24-hour day. And when you're a civilian, not to say you don't have your own traumas, of course you do, but when you are paid not to fight, not to flight, not to freeze, I don't know how you do it. Because I can't do that shit. I'm just saying there's certain shit that I know I can do that I can't do because I would literally lose my mind. I would be in a mental institution. And I know some of our brothers and sisters in blue are, but want you to know that as a minister, we love you, we support you, we understand what has happened to you. Just as something has happened to Black people, something has happened to blue people. Blue people are not bad people. They are traumatized people, and you have to understand what that looks like and what that means. So, brother, I really commend you on your commitment and the work that you've done. I've listened to a couple of your podcasts from the time that you sent me the email, and I looked at your website and what you're doing. And bravo, brother. And whatever I can do to support you 100%. Matter of fact, I'm going to have you come on my show, and we can chop it up and go in deep, and we can try to help as many lives as possible, whether it's a blue life, whether it's a Black life, to be able to navigate through this thing we call life.
Absolutely, man. I'd love to be on. Thank you so much, and I appreciate it, man. And thank you. Thank you. It's very complimentary. Thank you so much, man.
Absolutely, 100%. All right, peace.
I've kept you long enough, man. Take care, man.
All right, brother.
Okay.
Hotep.
Okay, Hotep, man. I want to thank Philippe Shock Matthews for coming on Captain Hunter's podcast. Powerful, powerful stuff. Please go over to Philippe Shock Matthews' YouTube page, The Making of Gayle King and Oprah. You can search for that. Check it out. Like I said, I watched that video a number of times back to back, and it was really just powerful, his breakdown, because it was what got me was not that a lot of people have been mad, have been acting out on their emotions, and they have been attacking of Gayle King and Oprah Winfrey. But I heard the sympathy in his voice. I could feel the empathy that he had while he was discussing and breaking them down and saying, the things that they were asking and the things that they have done, the documentaries that they have done, the interviews that they have done, really the result of pent-up trauma and an isolationism and a sense of not belonging to the very community where you started from, right? Remember what O.J. Simpson said. He said, "I'm not Black, I'm O.J.," right? So this is where this is coming from. This is where people forget about what happens until the tragic events happen, and then you are all of a sudden reminded of the color of your skin. So I really hope that this was informational, that you learned something today. I'm looking forward to having this brother back so we can really do some healing towards the community. And I appreciated everything he said about law enforcement, that he's not against law enforcement. He understands a lot of the trauma that people have. And when someone becomes a police officer, they become a police officer based on the totality of the circumstances and the environment that they have grown up in. Seth Stoughton, who I also had on the podcast before, would say the same thing, that we need more educated police officers and even older officers who are more experienced in life and who have a lot of history behind them who enter into law enforcement, right? We don't need broken people or people who are too young to understand and too young to have any life experience behind them. We need people who have some wisdom and some knowledge and some understanding to them. And also a few years of schooling in which they have gone to a university or college and allow themselves to be around people who are different from them, right? That's the most important thing. If you are a Black officer and you go into a white neighborhood, or you go into a predominantly Muslim neighborhood or European neighborhood or what have you, you need to have that life experience behind you and understanding different cultures. And the best way to get that is to exposing yourself to different people in different surroundings. So once again, I want to thank my special guest, Philippe Shock Matthews, for coming on. Please check out his YouTube page and go over to his website, firstfrequency.com. That's the number 1 ST, the word frequency.com. So make sure you go over there, check that out, give him some love and some support. And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. Until next time, much love and peace.